It's the July 4th RealAg Radio After Show. Let's go. And welcome to the RealAg Radio After Show. Hope everybody out there is having a great day. We just got off of RealAg Radio on Rural Radio 147, Sirius XM. Agronomic Monday. Could one say it was a tad bit quieter today without Wee Pete? He's on holidays. So we had a great lineup. I kind of miss Pete. I sort of miss our update and our discussion of what's going on and what are some of the things that he has heard, but he'll be back next week on RealAg Radio. Today's show is brought to you by Climate Field View. Go to climatefieldview.ca and please check them out. We talked all about the use of Climate Field View when it comes to fungicide application. We also had, speaking of fungicides, we talked to Kelly Turkington. He is research scientist with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada at the Lacombe station here in Alberta. Kelly, really one of Canada's leading experts when it comes to research on Fusarium. I'm definitely going to be posting that interview on realagriculture.com. We cover the whole gamut, the impacts of rotation, timing of moisture, overnight temperatures, and all kind of how that adds up. And, really what levels the quality of control that is out there for Fusarium. What are some of the misnomers? What are some of the things you need to really be paying attention to? And this is, Fusarium head blight's definitely something, if you're growing cereals and you've got some moisture at the right timing, then, it's on your radar. So it was really, really good. I really enjoyed that. We are also joined today by Matt Chappell. He's an agronomist with Pride Seeds based out of southwestern Ontario. Talked about kind of what's going on right now with crop conditions and not across the board, but some concern out there about the dryness and the lack of timely moisture hitting some of this corn crop and soybeans for that matter, I guess. It was interesting in Field Crop News. I'm just going to pull it up here. They sort of, kind of confirm some of the things that Matt was saying this past week with the heat and pineapple corn and rolled soybean leaves have been seen in both lighter and heavier soils. Moisture is needed to keep the good potential for yield on track. With the heat and where all the soil moisture is adequate, we are entering the elongation phase of corn growth, leading to mid to late July tasseling, depending on the location. In soybeans, much of the crop is starting to flower. The heat has brought on rapid color change in winter wheat as it heads toward grain fill and maturity. So that is that out in Ontario, and out west here. Where it's really a case of trying to get the spraying done. That feels kind of where a lot of people are really at here right now. We're seeing more moisture fall in Alberta here the past 2 days. I think more is supposed to hit places like southern Alberta, Calgary South tonight. And then it kind of rolls into Saskatchewan for into midweek. And so more rain definitely on the way for people on the prairies, which now some are going to be maybe celebrating that and some may be cussing that, depending on where you are and where you're at in some of your spray work. But I'll just take a look here. Look for like Winnipeg, for example. We're getting 90% chance of rain today, but 0.1 millimeters, so it's not a lot. Wednesday, we're looking at maybe 4 mils. So there's a chance of rain every day, kind of like Saturday coming up about 7 mils. So, that's not terribly a lot, but that whole area has had enough, right? It's been enough. So let's see, Saskatoon. Let's check on Saskatoon. Saskatoon Rain, Tuesday, 80% chance of rain, 5.5 mils. Nothing of real, Friday, Saturday, some more rain. High temperatures, we're pushing up to 30 degrees, 28 to 30 degrees here for the bulk of the week. Tomorrow, 19 degrees, kind of the low for that Saskatoon area. So it's typical. This is kind of, this isn't wild, crazy, like, hey, we've never seen this weather before. But a lot of people obviously pushing really hard to make sure they get their spraying done inside the windows that they are dealing with. So lots of stuff there covered. One of the things we mentioned today on the show was a CBC story that talked about how, yes, in parts of the Palliser Triangle, it has been raining, and ranchers are celebrating that, and so are some farmers in the area as well. But it's really been, it doesn't mean they're out of the drought zone yet, or they're out of the woods, so to speak. There's still a lot of concern going forward. There's a lack of subsoil moisture. Much more rain is needed to really, really build that moisture reserve and replenish what we really sucked completely dry last year. So I think the article really summed it up very well. It was two meteorologists with Environment Canada and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada talking about it. And, I think probably a lot of people talking about how, ideally, I think we would like moisture through the growing season here to get this crop to average or above in some parts. But, let's build that moisture reserve. I think it'd be better to maybe build it in the fall, post-harvest. That would be if we could put it on our wish list, would that not be a little bit more ideal than all that rain falling during the growing season, especially as we move into July here? Heavy rains on the crop that is decent will just create a whole bunch of lodging. So I don't know. Maybe I've got that wrong. I don't know. You tell me. Maybe you'll just take the moisture if you can get it. I didn't mention at the beginning that if you do want to participate in the conversation, definitely want your questions, comments, put them into the chat, and we are live. So we'll get to as much of that as we possibly can. Love the interaction with many of you that are out there watching the RealAg Radio after show. Was going to hit on this. We covered this in the news. It feels like every week goes by, we talk about it, and that is inflation. And let's be honest. Why is that so bloody big? Let's try this again. That should not be that big. That is crazy. I don't know what that is. Well, thanks, Jason. Here we got Jason says, "Thank you guys thanks for doing this, guys." Well, thank you, Jason. I appreciate it, man. All the best. Kyler says, "Everyone with a sled enjoys winter moisture." It's a really good point. We get a heavy, for Western Canada, we get harvest off. Ideally, we've got like an above average crop, and then we get pumped with moisture. Wouldn't that be the best timeline? To me, that really does. I think that really does make some sense. I agree, because a lot of growers though would say, Kyler, I know what you're saying, but some of that winter snowfall doesn't necessarily lead to rebuilding that moisture reserve. Okay, I'm having trouble with the screen share, but that is. Yeah, it's not working. Oh, hold on here. Google Chrome. There we go. That works. Awesome. Okay. Here's the story I want to talk about. Let's make that bigger for you. Move it over. A little bit bigger. Perfect. Bank of Canada had two surveys that were done. Basically, what it's saying is, this is from the Globe and Mail. Basically, what it's saying is that people are really worried about inflation. Businesses are worried. And, While businesses expect inflation to remain elevated as they grapple with labor shortages, rising wages, and supply chain bottlenecks, the surveys may provide additional impetus for the Bank of Canada to increase its benchmark interest rate by 0.75 percentage points at its July 13th rate decision. So that's coming up here in a couple weeks. If they do go up 75 basis points, that's going to be the largest increase since 1998. Central bank officials have said that keeping a lid on inflation expectations is their most important near-term task and that they are prepared to act more forcefully if needed. So inflation definitely really on the minds, obviously, of the Bank of Canada, the Federal Reserve, other central banks trying to figure out how to deal with it. When we had JP Gervais from Farm Credit Canada on the show a couple weeks ago, he talked about at that time, that was 2 weeks ago, that he wasn't certain this 75 basis point increase was like a for sure thing. The other strategy may be to be less aggressive, but still get to that point, that end point. So, maybe instead of going, say, 75 and 25, maybe you go 50 and 50. That may be something that would be make a little bit more sense, depending on what they wanted to do. But even when you turn on the nightly news, you just can't go very far whatsoever without this topic coming up. The price of gas, the price of food, just to name two. Those are the two that are really, really getting a focus. And it's real, and everybody should be super, super concerned. Speaking of gas, here's another one for you. The Ontario gas tax holiday. So a 6-month cut to Ontario gas and fuel tax took effect on Friday. Ontario's gas tax will be cut by 5.7 cents per liter for 6 months starting today. Legislation that passed this spring will also see the fuel tax, which covers diesel, cut by 5.3 cents per liter over the same period. And I saw curious what you think about all this. I on the surface, I'm like, okay, great, because Alberta did this as well. And people celebrated it. I think it's something, it probably has more of a detrimental impact on the provincial budget than it does necessarily in helping consumers. I saw it was a U.S. number, and I don't know what the tax rates were. If the U.S. went on a federal tax holiday for the next year, it would save people, like on average, like $300 on a truck, I think is kind of what it was on an annual basis. So not a lot, but it really sounds good. And I think it shows movement and assistance by provincial governments or federal governments in helping consumers out at a time where, it is expensive. We're even seeing, in the U.S. so much talk about fuel costs. The national average, I think, over $5 a gallon. Here, it's hard to find anywhere in Canada. It's under $2 a liter. For sure, under $1.90 a liter is extremely uncommon. And this whole issue just is not going away. Another issue we talked about on the show today that I'm also very curious on what happens in the go forward. We talked about Sirius Global pausing, not sure we should say canceling, but their planned canola crush plant at Northgate, Saskatchewan is definitely under threat. It's on thin ice. The company put out a statement on June 24th basically saying so. One of those things that they alluded to was the increased cost. When they were going to build it, it was something to the effect of it was going to cost like $350 million US. I imagine that is significantly higher as of today. And let's see here. But what I talked about on the show that I find interesting is this U.S. canola acre number that USDA posted last week. So with canola being the priority feedstock for renewable diesel, and if we are going to see all these canola crush plants built, or at least a majority of them, let's just say they are. This one at Northgate is definitely under threat at this point. Where does the U.S. canola acre going forward? We know Western Canada is really tapped out at like that 22 million acres. Like it can't like, we couldn't put a 30 on the board. If we did put a 30 on the board, we've got other problems like diseases and things like that would be a major concern. So the rotation of canola, unless something changes genetically, we really can't go much higher than we already are in an adequate moisture year. Okay, so the increase in oil produced is gonna have to come from genetics, whether that's through oil content or through yield. That makes sense. But what about the U.S.? How about the U.S.? And what we saw is Thursday's USDA acreage report pegged total American canola planted area for this year at 1.96 million acres. That's down slightly from the March intentions, but 9% below a year earlier, but still potentially the fifth largest national canola acre area on record. Compared with last year, canola planted area is down more than 8% in Minnesota, Montana, and North Dakota. You got to think the Montana number is definitely impacted by the drought, possibly parts of North Dakota as well. I'm not sure about Minnesota. The question I have is this the lowest number we see going forward? Like, is going forward 2 million acres the minimum of canola that be planted in the U.S.? If I was a betting person, I'd say, based on the potential of renewable diesel, I say yes, that is a very possible statement. We're going much higher than 2 million acres a year going forward based on the demand created by renewable diesel. The U.S. has lots of room to move when it comes to canola acres. Canada does not. Canada is very much tapped out in that acre. So, like we said, genetics increase yield, increase oil content. The same goes for on the U.S. side of the border when it comes to the canola acres, but they also can increase the acreage. There is room for growth in states like we just talked about. You know, I drove across from Lethbridge, Alberta to Havre, Montana. Saw some canola fields. Some looked really good. Some looked rather not great, but you know, you're seeing some canola. Is that going to be more common? When you fly over parts of the northern plains, will we start to see more yellow in that quilt? Because when you look from the airplane, you kind of see the quilt of the crops, we're almost to that point here in the growing season where it's really spectacular, and you kind of get those real contrasts, especially in the prairies. That is such a cool, just visual of that quilt, right? You got cereal crops, you got flax in some parts, definitely not as common as it used to be, and then you of course have the yellow flower of canola presenting that real contrast of that multicolored quilt of what is being grown out there. Of course, in one time, was a lot of fallow as well, which you see a lot less of for sure. Hey, jumping back here, I mentioned it's hard to find fuel in Canada under $1.90. Kyler says, hey, wait a minute. I filled up today in Northern Ontario for $1.77. What? How did that happen? I feel jealous. Here in Alberta, where most of it's produced, it's more expensive than that. Kyler says, hey, with drying-related costs for corn being variable, I could see Ontario pushing their canola acres higher. I agree, Kyler. You know, when we do the Farmer Rapid Fire on Thursdays, there is more and more growers, depending on where you are in Ontario, some thinking spring and some thinking winter. Okay? But I agree. We could also see a pretty decent jump. There's potential for growth. Same thing. The genetics can provide opportunity and growth when it comes to yield, oil content. But Ontario can also, just like the northern plains of the U.S., have an opportunity to increase the acreage. I don't know off the top of my mind oil content levels of springs versus winters. That's outside of what's in my head here right now, but that would be an interesting contrast, I suppose, to see what where the preference would be there. But why not? Why wouldn't Ontario, especially in Northern Ontario? I think that's that there's where there is some canola already grown. I think there's a lot of potential there for sure. Yeah, good stuff. Awesome. I don't think there was anything else in the news that we didn't get to. The government made an investment today in a fertilizer company of $1.6 million. They announced that. Quiet day here, really, because it's weird, because you really get an idea how much of the agricultural news cycle comes out of the U.S. on U.S. holidays, right? Like, I worked in the morning on July 1st because, did a U.S. radio show, Agri Talk, and then kind of caught up on a few things. But it was a regular day of, like, email was just, coming, and it was humming. And then you get to today, and very, very quiet. Like, today was like, and with the markets closed, man, really quiet. And I'm really looking forward to tomorrow. I think there is a lot of people wondering what this week looks like in the markets with last week's sell-off, some surprises on the soybean acreage, all of that kind of stuff, and this market feeling a little bit uneasy and really having a justification to move lower, funds having a harder time maintaining and holding those long positions. This could be a really, really interesting first week of July when it comes to the direction of the markets, as growers really try to figure out how to make the best decisions, marketing inventory into this kind of situation. For a long time, it has been, and I say easy as a figure of speech, but it's been easier to hold on to that inventory and just watch it go higher and not have to take action. This is a little bit different. Is it a falling knife at this point? Absolutely not. But it feels like, as I said last week on RealAg Radio, it feels a lot like we have moved from offensive marketing to more of a defensive mode. And we will see what happens this week and whether that sort of uneasy feeling that a lot of market analysts have had here. Well, really the last 3 weeks of market analysts on our Wednesday show have said in a different degrees of concern. There's reasons to be worried about the downside at this point. So we'll see what happens this week on that front. Hey, thanks everybody for watching today's RealAg Radio After Show. Really appreciate the participation. All the best to everybody, and we will see you again tomorrow. Cheers, everybody.